Southeast Texas holds deep secrets. Beyond the oil fields and forgotten logging roads lies a stretch of land swallowed by wilderness. From the Big Thicket to the Trinity River and down where the old and lost river joins Trinity Bay lies a truly dark region. Night flyovers reveal a triangle-shaped zone stretching for more than 50 miles with no signs of habitation and only the moon to light the forest, marsh, and bottomlands. In these remote wilds, reports of strange sightings have circulated for generations. There are famous ghost lights, strange apparitions, and reports of Bigfoot, often called wild man. These stories have grown globally famous, with the area considered a hotspot for that phenomenon. But there's another possibility, and something far more grounded in history and perhaps far darker. While the term wild man still echoes in relation to Sasquatch reports, there may be a whole other kind of wild man that has remained even more hidden than the infamous cryptid. While speaking on feral primates in America at the Texas Bigfoot Conference, I was approached by my friend and fellow researcher, Lyle Blackburn. He had recently revisited an old book by our mutual friend, the late Rob Riggs. This book steered us both onto a dark, strange, and highly mysterious path. In his research, Lyle had come across an account from the Big Thicket that chilled him to the bone.
The first time I really came across reports of possible either Native Americans or primitive feral humans living in South Texas in the woods was through the Rob Riggs book, Into the Big Thicket in Search of the Wild Man. And I was reading that book because I was interested in Bigfoot. And, you know, of course, the Big Thicket in those areas are heavy with Bigfoot sightings and stories. But what really jumped off the page to me is sort of these instances where individuals had reported sightings of what they described as Native Americans, primitive-looking men who didn't seem to be either from this era or definitely stood out. Not just simply, you know, someone dressed up like this. They looked authentic. This is how things work. I was reading something online about the Big Thicket, and a guy made a post. This was in a Facebook group or something, and he had heard something in the Big Thicket that was strange, but not like a Bigfoot howl. He said it was sort of like a war cry. And of course, boom, you know, I'm all over this because I'm thinking, a war cry? Well, that sounds very much, you know, like Native Americans or a tribe. I commented back and said, what do you mean, you know, and you mean animal-like or human-like? He said, human-like. Could it be, you know, something primitive or older like a Native American tribe? And, you know, he said, sure, you know, it was a possibility, but it was something that was very odd and something you wouldn't expect to hear when you just are out in the deep, remote woods. There's those things that start coming together once you're alerted to the phenomenon in a certain area. Things jump off the internet page in that case. So that kind of led me further down to think, okay, maybe there's more to this.
A woman from Saratoga told Rob Riggs that some male members of her family had gone hunting somewhere along the Little Pine Island bayou. They had just come around a bend in the stream when they were stunned to see a, quote, large, almost naked Indian in a rough-hewn dugout boat. They described this Indian as being very primitive-looking. The experience spooked them so much, they left the area in a hurry. While Rob Riggs was teaching English at a school in Beaumont, one of his students, Eddie Ramirez, told Riggs that his mom had a cabin in a remote fish camp near Trinity Bay. An old man who ran a small store and bait shop there told Eddie's mom that an electrical utility lineman had been sent to a remote area bordering the swamp to make repairs. After he had made the repairs and was ready to climb down from the utility pole, he was shocked to see several Indians surrounding the base of the pole. They glared at him menacingly before disappearing into the surrounding woods. The lineman described the strange men as, quote, nearly naked, primitive, and holding primitive-looking weapons. The owner of the bait shop found the story so interesting, he set out to investigate the area himself. He supposedly found the skeletal remains of a human strapped to the base of a tree, not far from where the lineman had seen the so-called Indians.
Lyle and I knew we had to get boots on the ground. We made plans and headed straight for the Big Thicket. Not just the parks or the hiking trails people know, but the deep zones, the targeted heart of it, where maps grow vague and old roads vanish into mud and cypress. We were looking for something older than campfire tales, something that might have slipped past history and kept to the shadows. We dug deep into the area, walking forgotten trails, talking to longtime locals, and revisiting the places that had shown up again and again in these stories. There's a heaviness to that land, a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It presses down on you. If any place in Southeast Texas could hold a secret like this, one that defied explanation, survived the centuries, and left only traces in stories and shadow, this was it.
This little Pine Island Bayou corridor through here in this particular area is where this family was out going to hunt in their boat, and they came across what they said was a primitive-looking Indian in a dugout. They looked very startled. They looked very angry at them early in the morning. So right in this same general area. So it's pretty interesting to think about all the mystery that's going to be wrapped up in this whole region.
Right. I mean, and you look at these waterway corridors and you can imagine something like that taking place. I mean, it's almost, when you're out here, it's like going back in time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not like you just stepped off the highway somewhere, there's a few woods. We're back in here. We can't hear a vehicle sound. We're in the middle of nowhere. It was like we walked into like 1800s East Texas.
Yeah. I mean, it really conjures the possibility of things like this and helps you envision what these people saw when we reported these very strange sightings.
So I'm glad we put some boots on the ground, able to kind of go in with that mindset, because this is things I've never looked before. I never had like the mindset of thinking about this. Now looking at the woods here in different eyes, it definitely opens my mind to the possibility.
Right. It's like when you read something on the page, I mean, you don't get the same perspective as when you come out here. And so as much as it jumped off the page or I'm reading Rob's book and you're out here, you're like, oh, it all comes together and you can envision all of this.
Yeah, and as night begins to fall, I think it's going to get a life freaky.
Oh, absolutely. It's already a little bit spooky just because it's so remote. And then you start losing sunlight, it's going to get really scary.
So if this isn't creepy enough, we decided to go out at night. We're going to make some calls that we've heard people say they've heard in these areas that don't sound like the call of an animal, the call of a person, maybe even a, quote, war cry. We're going into these areas with thermal imaging equipment and recording devices to see what we can record in the areas some of these very reports happened.
So, we're out here at night, just kind of soaking in the environment, listening to see if we can hear anything. I mean, these are the areas where people had reported not only seeing primitive type people, but hearing what they described as war cries. Obviously we've got audio recording equipment. We've been looking along the swamp and the bayou channels all day, obviously looking for any sort of clues or things we could find that indicated that someone was walking around here barefooted, things that would be sort of unusual. In a way, it's a little bit grasping at straws because some of the reports are older, though we do have some that are way more recent. So, it's something that if we don't get out here, we're not going to find anything. So, and it also gives you that perspective. I mean, especially the sun goes down. I mean, these are very dark woods, very dense woods. There's a lot of animals. We saw numerous wildlife tracks today, but when you start looking around, you don't see these animals, but they're out here. They're somewhere. So there's plenty of places for things to live and survive without us having eyes on it at all times.
One of the best ways to learn about woods is to go out at night and listen. You can see things from a certain distance, but here it's just really, really thick. You can hear things from a long ways away. And on this journey, one of the things that started it was someone hearing a very mysterious war cry. So we're here listening in a very frightening set of woods on a very cool night, very still night, as the moon's rising behind me. And it's kind of a spooky way to end an epic day of research. And I'm not gonna lie, if I hear a war cry sound off through here, it's gonna freak me out a little bit. Okay, just whatever that sounds like.
Something like I looked over a minute ago.
Did you hear that? After our time in the Big Thicket, we turned our attention south to where most of the alleged sightings had taken place, the Old and Lost River region, a strange intersection of coastal marshland and bottomland hardwood. As we crossed into Chambers County, I had a sudden memory, something I hadn't thought about in a couple of years. When I first launched the Dark Outdoors podcast, I had a conversation with a friend in law enforcement. He worked right there in the county, covering some of the most remote territory on the upper Gulf Coast. I had asked him a simple question: have you ever heard any dangerous encounters in those deep backwoods or bayous? He paused, then told me a chilling story. At the time, I didn't know what to make of it, but now, standing in that same area, boots sinking into the marsh, mud and dragonflies stick in the air, it clicked. This wasn't random. It wasn't isolated. We had to track down that story. And when we did, what we uncovered blew us away. Now, this person that I know wanted to tell their story, but did not want to be shown on camera or have their voice recognized. But I have verified this, been to the area, seen the map layout, and heard the whole story. And that's exactly what you're about to hear right now.
In 2020, I was working as a sheriff's deputy, and we had gotten a call from the sheriff and asked me if I could find somebody to come with me to get with the Marine unit, because he got a call from the county judge about the judge's wife who seen a man across from their house. And at that time, they lived on the Old Lost River, on the south side of the river, and across from their house was a bunch of Army Corps of Engineer land. The wife described the man as having been kind of crouched down, not moving, but could see, that it was a man. Described him wearing neutral color clothing and very scruffy hair, long hair. But what caught her attention was she saw the sunlight hitting the man's face across from the deal. And it really creeped her out because he wasn't moving. He was just sitting there, crouched down, watching. Her husband gets home. She tells a story about what she saw to him. And then a neighbor also mentions and seeing somebody walking down the bank across from the houses, because there were about 4 houses on that little stretch of the river right there. And they call it a river. It's more of a bayou. When we get the call from the sheriff, I rounded up a guy to come with me. We called the Marine unit. While we were doing that, I knew the game warden really well for the county at the time. So I gave him a call and explained to him what was going on. He's like, yeah, I'll jump in with y'all. Let's go see if we can figure out what's going on. And the whole time we're thinking, transient, somebody squatting on the Corps land, somebody, just hiding out. Maybe it's a felon or somebody that's got a warrant or something that's just trying to hide out. Once we get off the boat, we immediately find impressions in the mud, but it was definitely, an elongated human footprint. It was bipedal, one print after the other. And we could see where he crouched, and we started following the prints from where the person was crouching, and we were able to follow it for pretty good ways, but we would lose the prints at time because we'd have to cross actual water. I mean, it's almost like tracking a deer. I mean, you would just work the area on the other side of the water till you find the prints again or the impressions, and then you would go again. But the one thing that I was looking at the whole time we were walking through here is there was no trash like Coke cans or plastic wrappers. I mean, there was some old, I'm talking 1990s Coca-Cola cans and stuff, but there was nothing new trash-wise anywhere. And we had followed the prints all the way up to an island, basically. I mean, we were going knee-deep water at times, coming out, finding them again on dry land, and working our way up to this island that was just full of cypress knees. In the middle of the island, there was an area where you could tell somebody, cleaned out the underbrush, the leaves, the yopons, all of that. And there was where somebody had stripped the fronds of a palmetto or yopon or whatever you want to call it, and laid them down to where it looked like almost somebody would have been sleeping there. But the one thing that I noticed out of the whole situation was there was no fire like a person would typically have. There was no trash, there was no plastic, there was no food, there was nothing like that. There was nothing modern in the area whatsoever. It was just natural vegetation that you could tell had been manipulated, and that's about it. And it's okay, so where do we go from here? So we started working around that island, and we literally, on the opposite side of the island from where we came from, there was a stretch of water, and it was probably a little over ankle deep, but there was a stretch of muddy water right now in the middle of it where everything else was clear, like the water was just disturbed. Followed that, and it just kept going deeper in the woods. At that point, we decided, hey, this, we're just chasing, wasting time. Well, not really wasting time, but we're just chasing something that we're never going to catch. At the time, we weren't getting closer and closer to what we were finding. We just kind of found what we saw, and it was time to, hey, let's get out of here. Let's go back. Let's just report what we found. Call it good. We're not going to catch this guy today. So we get back to the boat. We get back to the land. We talked, me and the game warden are talking a little bit. Me and the other deputy are talking a little bit, and we all were just kind of talking in circles about how it was there was nothing in there to indicate that it was a transient at all. There was no trash. There was no, sneakers or shoes or socks or clothing hanging up or anything in that area to indicate that this was somebody who was making a camp out there. And so the next morning, I get on Google Earth and look at the area where this, where we started at, where we found the tracks, where we're looking for everything, where the people reported seeing the person. And it was, you'd have had to swim significant amount of water, and it was probably 2.5 to 3 miles from the nearest road. So somebody who was in there, if they wanted to be in there, they really had to make it a point to get to that point where we saw the tracks and the people reported seeing the person. Never heard of any more reports. We told them we looked, we didn't find, anybody. We obviously didn't tell them that the extent of what I'm talking about now, because we wanted to just ease the issue and let them think, okay, we did what we were supposed to do. We went and looked and we're done. But, the three of us that were actually on foot looking all know that, hey, there was definitely something there.
That story planted a seed. It gave us a wild but strangely plausible idea. What if there were still people living in primitive fashion, somehow surviving out there? Were they extreme survivalists trying to reject the modern world? Were they feral people off the grid and beyond the law? Or were they something else entirely? A remnant, however small, of the so-called lost tribes in early colonial records. We didn't know, but we were determined to find out. While reviewing topographic and satellite maps, one particular area caught my eye. It was a piece of high ground, rare in the low-lying flood-prone region. More than that, it had something strategic, multiple canal access points that would make travel by boat or foot possible to nearly every corner of the old and lost river system. We marked it and made plans. Our team went in expecting to poke around, maybe find old hunting cams or derelict gear, just give the place a good solid once-over. But what we found was shocking.
This is the first time that probably anybody's gone in there to research these documented incidents in which people saw what they believed were surviving Native Americans. And we're going in there with different eyes because it's fascinating just on a basic level of being able to go the places that were reported in the book to get that sense of would this be a place that's even possible for somebody to survive a small population? And then on top of that, to be looking to perceive that you could find anything that may sort of add to the growing documentation, which now not only Rob Riggs has started, but Chester Moore and myself are adding to it, and now by going into the area could potentially add something even more fascinating.
Well, this is really the maiden voyage of this search. As far as I know, no one has ever done this before.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody has come out here with the purpose of researching sightings of primitive natives.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And we have all the historical things here in the Trinity River, Old and Lost River, going up into the Big Thicket. But I'm interested in that 2020 account of a wild man here on one of these islands. We're going to try to go in that area and see what we can find.
Yeah, I mean, it always adds more intrigue when there's been something recent to look into, and that's very recent and totally unexpected.
Yeah, and a law enforcement officer, a lot of credibility. Here we go.
Let's do it.
And all they gotta do is go behind the reed right there and they're gone.
Yeah, just kneel down, no one would ever see it.
We talk about cannibalism. If you got to live with these mosquitoes, you might go a little crazy.
You're right. After a while, you're like,
missing link of why there's cannibalism. It wasn't ritualistic, it was freaking mosquitoes made them mad.
Yeah, you just kind of lost it.
Let's try to that big piece because it's got tall ground with those big trees of hard ground over there. Yeah. Okay, we're on this island in an undisclosed location, the lower Trinity Basin, we're gonna call it right here. And we decided to explore around it and just, because this was, I think when we were talking, this was sort of the epicenter where a lot of these reports that Rob Riggs originally reported from.
Right, yeah, this is the area where those early reports came in from, so it's sort of ground zero.
So me and my friend Daniel, who's helping us out, walked down this trail, looking, we're all kind of split up. And I noticed this human track, maybe a week old. And then there's another right here, you can see about the right gate, and there's one coming that way. It's definitely not a boot mark. So I would say that's a person. Why would they be barefooted?
That's the craziest thing. I mean, even if it's just coincidental. We get off on an island, and within 5 minutes, there's a bare human footprint. And who would be barefooted?
I wouldn't be barefooted out here. We just came across a snake.
Right.
And that was non-venomous, but there's cottonmouths all out here.
Yeah, I don't think, and most people don't go barefoot either.
No,
I mean, if you're out, even if you're out boating or fishing or duck hunting, whatever you're doing, most people are just not doing that barefooted.
No, so, and you can see the toe detail right there. So we're gonna continue looking down this little path. Looks like we can't go too far in there, but we're gonna give it a shot and look anyway.
Those tribes sort of vanished. You know, they weren't on the Trail of Tears and showed up with big reservation areas where a lot of these tribes unfortunately ended up. Less is known, and there's a lot of confusing information. And a lot of times, and perhaps not coincidentally or coincidentally, in terms of these tribes that lived along the Gulf Coast in southern Texas, the Karankawas had this reputation as being very formidable, dangerous, described as being a tribe you don't want to cross. And even so far as there's speculation that they practiced cannibalism. In researching these tribes, I know that's been distorted a lot. And once you tell somebody, oh, they're cannibals, well, that's all people remember. And they become these scary things. So, we don't want to say this is what they are. This is just simply what people have talked about and what's speculated, and builds this sort of aura around these tribes who actually lived in the area where people were reporting seeing tribes. And the fact that they're unaccounted for the most part, leads one to wonder, did these tribes or small bands of surviving members say, we're not doing what the U.S. government wants us to do? We're going to live off the land deep in the woods where we already know how to survive. And a small group of these could very well have survived in some out-of-the-way place, particularly the forests of the Big Thicket and places where you didn't have a lot of foot traffic until really in modern times. They could have very well survived. I mean, you have to give them that credit. They did live off the land, and it's possible. So that fuels this whole fascination with these reports may not be as crazy as people might write them off.
Imagine being deep in the woods of East Texas in modern times, far into the woods, far beyond roads and far beyond civilization. And you see something coming up. You're thinking, what is that? And then you lock eyes with what looks like a primitive First Nations Indian person. Not someone doing cosplay. Something that looks like it walked out of time, looking right at you. When we started hearing these reports that we can trace from at least the 60s to the 1980s, and began a discussion, are there hidden tribes, hidden peoples in the deep woods of East Texas? What happened out there over the last 100, 150 years that was never recorded, never shown on camera, never verified, but was definitely real? That's a question that sends chills down my spine. To understand the full weight of what we were uncovering, we had to go back deep into the murky edges of colonial history. The coastal regions of Southeast Texas were once home to two of the most enigmatic tribes in North America, the Karankawa and the Attakapas. The Karankawa were tall, many accounts say unusually so. Spanish explorers and early settlers often described them as towering men, heavily tattooed and smeared with a foul-smelling grease made from shark oil or alligator fat to repel mosquitoes. They pierced their bodies, practiced complex rituals, and were master paddlers of dugout canoes, capable of navigating vast distances along the Gulf Coast bays and marshes. The Attakapas, further to the east, going into Louisiana, were no less mysterious. Linguistically isolated, spiritually intense, and feared by their neighbors, they shared certain traits with the Karankawa, especially the one that sealed their legends in blood: cannibalism. Spanish missionaries and French traders alike documented the practices ritualistic, purposeful, and deeply ingrained in tribal warfare. They didn't do it for sustenance, they did it for power. To consume their enemies was to absorb their strength, and then, just as suddenly as they appeared in the records, they were gone. No signed treaties, no large-scale migrations, no burial mounds marking the end, just silence. The idea of being in the deep forest, and locking eyes with someone, maybe even at point blank range, who looks like a primitive person is terrifying because it represents the unknown. I've always said the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't bears or boars, it's people. Typically, I'm thinking about running into someone in the drug trade or maybe some kind of a human predator like a serial killer. But what about locking eyes with someone from a primitive surviving tribe that doesn't understand me and I don't understand them? There's a gap in communication, and I am intruding into their domain, their last surviving wild grounds. I couldn't blame them for responding in some kind of a defensive manner. It's something to think about as we close in on all these wild grounds. If there are remnants like this, will there be encounters? I have my suspicions that maybe there are none of these people left, but maybe there are. You know, if I went out in the woods and I just ran into some Native American guys, which I have before in Colorado and places, I'd be like, oh, someone out there. I don't think of like who I run into as a race or a culture. I just go, it's people. And these would just be people. But then again, it's like people who stepped out of time. Or maybe I stepped back into time in this situation and we're locking eyes. Yeah, it would be terrifying for sure, but also deeply fascinating. How would I respond? How would they respond? You know, I love my encounters in the wild and I kind of like the spooky stuff at times. But I really don't know if I want to have that moment happen because I don't know what would happen. It's the deep unknown. But I have to have some sympathy here. If these people survived into the 80s or 90s or today, what did they have to go through to get there? And what would they do to defend their last wild lands?
This investigation doesn't end here. What began in the wilds of Southeast Texas will continue and then move into the dark folds of the Appalachians and the Smoky Mountains. There's no doubt a chilling element lingers in these stories. Encounters with shadowed figures, strange cries, and traces of lives lived far from the modern world. But through it all, both Lyle and I found ourselves developing a deep respect for anyone capable of surviving, hidden, untethered, into the 80s and maybe even now, despite the relentless march of development. The truth of who or what is out there may never be known, and maybe that's for the best, for them and for us. They're meant to remind us that there are still places where the old world lingers just beyond the firelight, waiting in the shadows.